Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steven Kitchell, and this is part 3 of our presentation showing that Baha'u'llah is Return of Christ. But today we're going to be going over Islamic history and Baha'i history. But before we get started, we're going to have our wake-up video, and then it's one of my favorite songs. It's called Everlasting God by Lincoln Brewster.
The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall and exhaust. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They'll soar high on wings like eagles. They'll run and not grow weary. They'll walk and not faint.
All right. As always, one of my favorite songs is the Christian. So, well, this is to review from last week. Last week, trumpet blast number 1 was the Roman persecution of the Christians. Trumpet blast number 2 was the crisis of the 3rd century AD in the Roman Empire. Trumpet blast number 3 was Emperor Constantine bringing Christianity into the Roman Empire. The 4th one was the fall of West Rome. And the 5th trumpet blast, also coinciding with the first woe of the book of Revelation, was the coming of Islam. So, today's discussion is going to be broken down to 3 parts. First one, we're going over the beast of Revelation in Daniel. Second one, we're going to be going over the 2 witnesses, which is getting more into Islamic history. Then part 3 is going to be the 6th trumpet blast and the second woe of the book of Revelation, which coincides with the Bab. And so, let's begin. Now, we get some extensive descriptions of the beast in the books of Daniel and Revelation. So, starting Revelation chapter 13, it says, "The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horn, and on each a blasphemous name." And it says a little bit later in the same chapter, "He also forced everyone, small and rich, great and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. And Daniel chapter 7 gives us another description. "He will speak against the Most High and oppress the saints and try to set change the set times and laws." Islam has a different calendar because if you remember, the Islamic calendar starts in the year 622 when Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina. And that's 0 after Hijrah, is the flight. And the Islamic calendar is based off the lunar, which is 354 days, not 365. And Islam also has something called Sharia law. So that changes the set times laws. So we know what we're looking at here. Then in Revelation 13, it says, "Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the beast whose fatal wound had been healed." And so Abdu'l-Baha gives us an exact description of what this is. This dragon represents the Umayyads, because the Umayyad, they were an Islamic Caliphate that ruled for a while. It says, "This dragon represents the Umayyads who seized the reins of the religion of Muhammad. And the 7 heads and 7 crowns represent the 7 dominions over which they came to rule. The Roman dominion in Syria, the Persian, the Arabian, and the Egyptian dominions. The dominion of Africa, that is Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria, and the dominion of Andalusia, which is now Spain, and the dominion of the Turkish tribes of Transoxania." So, then coming down to the end of the 10 horns, it says, "The 10 horns represent the names of the Umayyad rulers. For barring repetition, they are 10 sovereigns, or 10 names of chiefs and rulers. The first is Abu Sufyan, and the last is Marwan. Some of their names have been repeated. This includes 2 Muawiyahs, 3 Yazids, 2 Walids, and 2 Marwans." As Abdu'l-Baha answers questions. And just as a reminder, Abdu'l-Baha, he's basically the equivalent to Paul in Christianity. So this is why we consider this authoritative interpretation. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of give you a brief overview of the Islamic Caliphates. Then we're going to go through and break each one down exactly how each one fits into scripture. And that's what part 1 is going to be. And then it's also going to tie into part 2 and 3. So the Prophet Muhammad, he came down, he received his revelation, and he had his time on prophet. He passed away, and he had no designated heir. So this is when he had the Shiite Sunni split. And this is what was given, promised to Ishmael, the 12 rulers who were the 12 Shiite imams and the great nation. These are the Sunni caliphates. And so the first caliphate that immediately followed the Prophet Muhammad was the Rashidun Caliphate, which is the first one right here. Caliph Uthman, he was the last caliph, and we're going to break him down in the next slide. So after the Rashidun Caliphate was there, then came the Umayyad Caliphate. And that's what Abdu'l-Baha just described. That's the beast of Daniel Revelation. And they're also the beast out of the sea in the book of Revelation. Muawiyah, he was the first Umayyad Caliph, and we're going to be going into him extensively. And then after the Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown, then came the Abbasid Caliphate. And they're the beast out of the earth in Revelation, and they're the ones who healed the wounded head, because the wounded head is the Umayyad Caliphate. And so, just to recap before we start breaking it down, the Prophet Muhammad, he comes, he passes away. Islam goes into a split. We have the 12 Imams, who are the 12 rules that Ishmael was promised. Those are the Shiites. You have the beast here in the Islamic Caliphates, that this is the great nation that Ishmael was promised. You got the Rashidun Caliphate, who immediately followed the Prophet Muhammad because the ruling council wanted to elect the leader. Then they were overthrown. You had the Umayyad Caliphate come into power. This is the beast in Daniel and Revelation. And so then once they're overthrown, then you have the Abbasid Caliphate coming in. They are the beast out of the earth in the book of Revelation, and they are the ones who healed the wounded head. And again, we're going to get more into details as we go on for part one. And so I'm going to take everyone chronologically through. And so let's go with Caliph Uthman. He was the last Rashidun Caliph, because when Muhammad, when he passed away, the Islamic Empire, it was only in the Arabian Peninsula. It did not stretch out to the rest of the world. The Rashidun Caliphate, they began sending their armies out, and they stretched from the modern day border in Tunisia and Libya in the east, all the way to the modern day Iranian-Pakistani border in the east. And so Islam began to really expand after the Prophet Muhammad passed away. Now, Caliph Uthman, he was the last Rashidun Caliph, but during the time of Muhammad, he was one of the earliest converts, but he was not a really imposing figure during his time. Because during the Arabian culture during the time, you did not leave your tribe. If you left your tribe, it was effectively a death sentence. And so when Caliph Uthman, when he converted to Islam, left his tribe, that was a really big leap of faith that he had to take going to Islam, because it could have meant his death. However, it didn't, because he's part of the Banu Umayyad tribe, and that's just one of the many tribes that they had in the Arabian Peninsula. And so after Muhammad passed away, he was always there in Islam, and then he became the last Rashidun Caliph. Now, during his time as Caliph, there was beginning to become many revolts rising up against the Rashidun Caliphate, because as they're expanding, as the Islamic armies were going out, not everyone was accepting Islam. So he was having to put down rebellions. And one of the places that he was having a lot of problems with was in Egypt. Egypt kept rebelling against him. And what eventually happened is assassins from Egypt had Caliph Uthman assassinated. And so in the aftermath of the death of Caliph Uthman being assassinated, this is the first fitna, the Islamic Civil War. Because what happened is Caliph Uthman, he's the last Rashidun Caliph. He was assassinated, and the assassins fled down here to the city of Medina. I mentioned Muawiyah. He's the first Umayyad Caliph. He was also the governor of Syria during this time. So what happened was Muawiyah had the support of Aisha. Aisha was the third wife of Muhammad, and she was his youngest wife. What happened was they went to Ali, the first Shi'ite Imam, and they wanted Ali to say to turn the assassins over. Ali said, "I don't have the assassins. I can't turn them over. The assassins are from Egypt." But Ali and Aisha said, "No, they're in Medina right now. You control Medina, turn them over." And again, Ali's like, I can't turn them over. I don't control it. I don't have the assassins. So what ended up happening is in year 656 AD, 36 after Hijrah on the Islamic calendar, Aisha and Ali fought each other at the Battle of the Camel. It's right down here around Basra, modern day Iraq, right along the Persian Gulf. So what's significant about this is this was the first time Muslims fought each other, and about 10,000 Muslims were involved in this battle. So now this is the first time ever Muslim blood was spilling Muslim blood, and this is recognized as the start of the Islamic Civil War. Because what happened in the Islamic Civil War, because the assassins are from Egypt. Egypt and Muawiyah, he was the governor of Syria. They went more for the Umayyad Caliphate. The Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, and modern day Iran, they went for Ali. So Islam was split in half, and they're falling into a civil war now. And so after Imam Ali, after he defeated Aisha in the field of battle, he moved up into Syria and fought at the Battle of Siffin, which is about right here, close to the modern day city of Raqqa. And this battle was a draw. Muawiyah, he's the first Umayyad Caliph, and Imam Ali, the first Shiite Imam, neither one that could claim a decisive advantage over the other one. So Islam at this point was split in half. Again, Egypt and Syria were going for the Umayyad Caliphate under Muawiyah. The rest of them, the Arabian Peninsula, modern day Iraq, and modern day Iran, they were going for Imam Ali. So Islam was split in half at this point. What ended up happening is Imam Ali, he was assassinated in the year 661. And so the first Shi'ite Imam is now assassinated, and Caliph Uthman is assassinated. This is where we come to the second Shi'ite Imam, Imam Hassan, the son of Ali. He made a deal with Muawiyah. I will not oppose your rule as the Umayyad Caliph if you spare my life. And and Muawiyah agreed. However, 10 years later, Imam Hassan mysteriously passed away, and many people think that he was assassinated. And so with this, the Umayyad Caliph, the beast of revelation in Daniel, that Abdul-Baha described, was now in power, and Muawiyah was the sole ruler of Islam. So going over the Umayyad Caliphate, as I said, it was founded by Muawiyah. He was originally a governor. He was a governor of Damascus originally, and the governor of Syria. And while he was the governor, a lot of people did not like him. He started taking a lot of the wealth of the region and using it to build a very opulent green palace for himself in Damascus. And I said, he consolidated his power in year 666. And as we know, the Bible says the number of the beast is 666. So in addition to Abdul-Baha's authoritative interpretation, this is another reason we know that we're dealing with the Umayyad Caliph. And then to get power, he also had a lot of his political opponents killed off. Because again, Caliph Uthman was assassinated by people from Egypt. Egypt supported Muawiyah's claim. Imam Ali was assassinated, giving Muawiyah sole control of Islam. Imam Hassan mysteriously passed away, so nobody could challenge him at this point. And that's how he got sole control of Islam. Now, to be fair, historians do dispute if he actually had them assassinated or not, but it was very conveniently done for him to become sole ruler, so best case scenario is very suspicious. But another thing he did is because Jesus, he didn't get married or have children. Muhammad, he did get married and he did have children. And so if there's any direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad that became popular, he had them killed off immediately because he did not want anyone challenging his rule for the sole ruler of the Umayyad Caliphate. And even today, many modern day scholars widely condemn this guy. And as I said, modern day scholars don't like him. And that's why he's the wounded head on the beast of Revelation. And that's why Abdul-Baha says that the Umayyad Caliphate is the beast of Daniel and Revelation. So here's a map exactly. I just want to get everyone a good visualization for how the Islamic Caliphates expanded. Because right here in the dark red, this is what Muhammad united during his time as the prophet. He united the Arabian Peninsula, and remember from last week, he began coalescing everything into a nation. Then the orange here, this is how far the Rashidun Caliphate expanded. Because as I said, they expanded from borders of Pakistan and Iran all the way out to Tunisia and Libya. And then the yellow here, this is where the Umayyad Caliphate really continued their expansion. They went all the way up into Spain, basically to the modern day border of India and Pakistan. Because if you remember from last week, as I said, the Islamic armies were unstoppable for the first 150 years. They overcame everyone. And that's what was promised to them in the fifth trumpet blast. And so, we get a little further description in the book Daniel, chapter 7. It says, then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with his iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured his victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also want to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Because if you remember back from week 1, biblical prophecy is written symbolically, not literally. And Daniel had the authority to interpret symbols. And here's what he tells us about the beast. He says, he gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the others and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings whom will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the saints and try to change the set times and laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times and a half. Again, we already went over the change in the times and laws. Islam has a different calendar, and Islam has something called Sharia law. Times and a half, that's 1,260 years. And if you take us 0 after Hijrah in the Islamic calendar to year 1,260 in the Islamic calendar, that takes us to 1844, which is when the Bab declared to be a manifestation. And then coming over here, the 10 horns. Because Abdu'l-Baha told us what the horns were, but this one is a little different. And we have 3 horns coming in and falling off because we have a smaller horn coming up. Because Muawiyah, he was a little horn initially because he's only a governor. Because he wasn't a larger horn because a governor is not a king. But he grew from being a governor to a king. And to become the leader of Islam, he had to have 3 of opponents removed. Caliph Uthman, the last Rashidun Caliph, Imam Ali, the first Shi'ite Imam, and Imam Hassan, the second Shi'ite Imam. That's how he took power. That's how he took power. And so those are what those symbols mean. Also, the mark of the beast, because it says, everyone must take a mark on their right hand or their forehead, otherwise that they cannot buy and sell. Islam has something called the Jizya. And the Jizya, that's a tax that non-Muslims must pay. Only Muslims must pay it. It's not the Jizya itself that is the mark of the beast. It is the mark that they had to take on their right hand or forehead. Because what Muawiyah did is he said that everyone must take a mark. And that way, whenever they went to go buy and sell, they knew who had to pay the tax and who didn't. Because we have some pictures here. This is a tattoo cross on this lady's forehead. And this is in Ethiopia. And then we got a Jizya tattoo here in Egypt on the right hand. That way they could track who had to pay that tax and who didn't. So the supporters of Muawiyah had to take the mark on their right hand. Those who opposed them had to take the mark on their forehead. That's what the mark of the beast is, and that's what the Bible tells us. So that's how we know, in addition to what Abdu'l-Baha says, that's how we know that the Umayyad Caliphate is the last one in the book of Revelation. Or is the beast in the book of Daniel and Revelation. But it also says there's going to be another beast there. And as Daniel chapter 7, it says, "Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and his body thrown into the blazing fire." So the Umayyad Caliphate here, it says that it's going to be destroyed, and it was destroyed. And the beast that destroys it, the Bible says in Revelation 13, he exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. Because again, Muhammad passes away. Then comes the Rashidun Caliphate. Caliph Uthman is assassinated, and that's the Muawiyah and the Umayyad Caliphate come into power. And that's the beast that Abdu'l-Baha describes. The Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown, and that's when the Abbasid Caliphate came in. They were the next ones. And under the Abbasid Caliphate, this was known as the golden era of Islam. And they reigned supreme in the world for about the next 1,000 years. And with the Abbasid Caliphate overthrowing the Umayyad Caliphate, that's what healed the wounded head. And so, just to make sure that we're all able to follow it, we're coming back to this slide. So Muhammad passes away. That's when the Rashidun Caliph comes into power. Caliph Uthman, one of the companions of Muhammad, he was the last caliph. Then he was assassinated, and Islam fell into a civil war, which is what brought the Umayyad Caliph to power. And this was the beast that Abdu'l-Baha described. Muawiyah, he was the first caliph. And this is also the beast Al seen Revelation. And for Muawiyah to get power, Islam fell into a civil war. And he was initially a governor. And in that civil war, Uthman was assassinated, Imam Ali was assassinated, and Imam Hassan mysteriously passed away. Those are the 3 horns that are being removed right there. Then afterwards, the Umayyad Caliphate, they're overthrown by the Abbasid Caliphate. That's the beast out of the earth in the book of Revelation. And that's and the Abbasid Caliphate is known as the golden era of Islam, and that's why the wounded head was healed right there. And so we're coming to the time of the Gentiles. Luke 21 says, "They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time the Gentiles are fulfilled." And for how long the time of the Gentiles is, but exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. So remember, biblical prophecy, 1 day is equivalent to 1 year. So 42 months is 1,260 years. That takes us to year 1844 AD, and that's when the Bab declared. So that's what they're talking about right here. And right here, this is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. It was built by the Umayyad Caliphate, and it was built in the outer courts of the temple. So that's why the Jews cannot rebuild their third temple right now, because the Dome of the Rock is sitting there where it should be sitting. And it says, but exclude the outer courts. Do not measure it because it has been given to the Gentiles. That's how we know this is referring to the Islamic calendar right here. And that's how we know this is time of the Gentiles, because the Dome of the Rock sits in the outer courts of where the Jewish temple was. And that's, as I said, that's why the Jews cannot build the third temple right now, because to do so would probably cause an enormous war. And so we see this 1,260 days come up over and over again. We see it 2 times in the book of Daniel and 5 times in the book of Revelation. 1,260 days is 1,260 years. That's the 1260 after Hijra in the Islamic calendar is year 1844 AD. And so that we start to see convergence here. And so this is part 1. This is to recap, the beast of Daniel is the Umayyad Caliphate. Beast out of the sea is also the Umayyad Caliphate. Beast out of the earth is the Abbasid Caliphate. So with that, the time now is, let's see, 2:26. Let's come back at 2:35. And then we'll be jumping to part 2. And for part 2, Abdu'l-Baha gives us a verse-by-verse breakdown, so it is going to be less information heavy. So let's take a break, and I'll be here if anybody has any questions. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be going to part 2, which is the 2 witnesses. So what we're going to do is we're going to be reading the paragraph off. Then we're going to go verse by verse. We'll read the verse again. Abdu'l-Baha gives us a breakdown. Then I'll throw my commentary in it, put it in a little bit more historical perspective. Then we'll be done. We'll jump to part 3. So, first paragraph. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the worshipers there. But exclude the outer court, do not measure it because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. These men have power to shut up the sky so that it will not rain the other time that they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. So we're going to go verse by verse. We'll read the verse. Abdu'l-Baha, he gives us a verse by verse breakdown, and then I'll add my commentary to it. Revelation 11:1. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go measure the temple of God and the altar, count the worshipers there. Now, when Abdu'l-Baha gives the interpretation, it's going to be slightly different from what it says and what I have written. Whenever I did this, I used the New International Version. Abdu'l-Baha used a different version. So if you see slight discrepancies in there, that's where those discrepancies are going to come from. But Abdu'l-Baha, remember, he's the Paul equivalent in the Baha'i faith. He says, by this reed is meant the perfect man, and the reason for his being likened to a reed is that when the latter is not entirely freed and emptied of its pith, it becomes capable of producing wondrous melodies. Moreover, these songs and airs proceed not from the reed itself, but from the player who blows into it. It goes on to say a little bit later. That is to weigh and gauge. To gauge is to determine the quantity of a thing. Thus, when the angel said, weight the Holy of Holies and the altar, and them that are worshiping therein, that is, investigate their true condition, discover their rank and station, their attainments, their perfections, conduct, and their attributes, and acquaint thyself with the mysteries of those holy souls who abide in the station of purity and sanctity of the souls. So what they're saying here is, it's not about the messengers of God. It's about God and the teachings. That's what that's about, because it's not about the instrument. It's about the music that comes from the instrument. And then what they're saying is, they're gauging how many believers in there, do they truly believe in God, and what's their station? That's what this verse is talking about here. And they have to go into the temple and count the worshipers. That's what that says right here. So moving on to the next one. But exclude the outer courts. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. Abdu'l-Baha says, when in the beginning of the 7th century of the Christian era, Jerusalem was conquered, and the Holy of Holies, that is, the edifice that Solomon had erected, and outwardly preserved, but its courts was seized and given over to the Gentiles. Because as I said from part one. Solomon's temple was destroyed. The Jews rebuilt their second temple, and that was destroyed in year 70 AD. That's the temple that they're referring to. However, as I said in part one, the Dome of the Rock was built by the Umayyad Caliphate in the outer courts of the temple. So that's why the Jews can't build the third temple now. That's what that's referring to. And Abdul-Wahhab goes on to say, that is, the Gentiles will seize and subdue Jerusalem for 42 months, or 1,260 days, or 1,260 years, which is the duration of the Quranic dispensation. For according to the Bible, each day is a year, as it is said in Ezekiel 4:6. This is a prophecy concerning the duration of the dispensation of Islam, when Jerusalem was trodden underfoot, meaning that it was dishonored, while the Holy of Holies remained preserved, guarded, and honored. As the 1,260 years has been completed, the holy city of Jerusalem is now beginning to flourish again. Anyone who saw Jerusalem 60 years ago and who sees it today again will recognize how it has come to prosper and flourish and how it has regained honor. Because in Judaism and Christianity, the holy city is Jerusalem. In Islam, the holy city is Mecca. The next holy city is Medina, then comes Jerusalem. So while it was under the control of Islam, the city of Jerusalem wasn't flourishing because they're focused on Mecca. But once the Jews began returning in the 1800s, going into the 1900s, the city began to flourish more. And I have a picture here what Abdul-Baha was talking about. Because this picture down here at the bottom, this is the Dome of the Rock here. As you can see, there's just a lot of empty space there. The city of Jerusalem really is not flourishing while it's under control of the Gentiles. But now we're coming up. Here's another picture of the Dome of the Rock. You see how the city of Jerusalem has began to flourish again once the Jews began returning to Israel. So that's what Abdul-Baha is talking about here. While it's under control of the Gentiles, it wasn't flourishing. But now that the Jews have returned, it's beginning to flourish again. So coming down to the next verse. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Abdul-Baha says, by these two witnesses are intended Muhammad, the messenger of God, and Ali, the son of Abu Talib. In the Quran, it is said that God addressed Muhammad saying, we made thee a witness, a herald, and a warner. That is, we have established thee as one who bears witness, who imparts the glad tidings of that which is to come, and who warns of the wrath of God. A witness means in the by whose affirmation are ascertained. The commandments of these two witnesses are to be followed for 1,260 days, each day corresponding to a year. Now, Muhammad was the root and Ali the branch, like Moses and Joshua. It is said they were clothed in sackcloth, meaning that they appeared not to wear new raiment, but an old one. In other words, they initially appeared to be of no consequence in the eyes of the people, and their cause would not seem new. So this is Abdul-Baha says, the two witnesses are Muhammad, the messenger of God, and Ali. He's the first Shi'ite Imam. And so they're likened to Moses and Joshua. Because if you remember in the Bible, Moses was the one who delivered the children of Israel from Egypt, and they crossed the Red Sea, and Moses received the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. However, Moses did not lead the children of Israel back to Canaan. They had to wander the desert for 40 years because of the disloyalty. It was Joshua who returned the children of Israel to Canaan. Just like in Islam, Muhammad did not lead the Arabs out of the Arabian Peninsula. That was the Rashidun Caliphate and Ali who did that. So that's what this is referring to here. Moses did not return to Canaan, just like Muhammad did not lead Islam out of the Arabian Peninsula. That's what he's talking about here. And it appears to be nothing new because Christianity is already around and Judaism is still there. So it looks like it's nothing new, and many people did not take Muhammad and Islam seriously at first. But as I said, it was Islam that built their caliphates, which were the supreme powers in the world for the next 1,000 years. So even though it appeared to be of no consequence, it actually was. That's what Abdul-Baha is referring to here. So coming down to the next verse. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. Abdul-Baha says, these two souls have been likened to olive trees, since all the lamps of that time were lit at night with olive oil. In other words, these are the two souls from whom the oil of divine wisdom. which is the cause of the illumination of the world, will appear, and through who the lights of God will shine bright and resplendent. He goes on to say, they have arisen in his service and are educating his creatures. For instance, they educated the barbarous desert dwelling tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, as it calls them, to attain the loftiest heights of human civilization at the time and to spread their fame and renown throughout the world. Because when Muhammad came, when he's in the Arabian Peninsula during the time of the Prophet, all the Arabs were just a bunch of tribes fighting each other. They really didn't amount to anything. But once Muhammad united the Arabian tribes, as I said, they were the supreme powers for the next 1,000 years. They were the Islamic Caliphates were the center of science. Their empire stretched all the way from India all the way to Spain under the rule of one caliphate. And so by listening to the teachings of God, that's how they're able to unite and build themselves their empire. That's what Abdu'l-Baha is referring to right here. So, next verse. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. It says, this means that no soul will be able to withstand their might. That is, should anyone seek to subvert their teachings or their law, he would be overcome and defeated by virtue of that law which proceeds. In other words, they would issue a command that would destroy any enemy that would attempt to harm or oppose them. And so it came to pass, for their opponents were all vanquished, dispersed, and destroyed, and these two witnesses were outly assisted by the power of God. So if you remember from last week, I showed you that video, how Islam just expanded for the first 150 years. No one could stop them. That's what they're referring to right here. Every army that they came across, they overcame every one of them. And those were the 150 years and the fifth trumpet blast that Islam was promised. And as I said, Muhammad, during his time as prophet, in a 10-year period, he fought 65 battles. That's averaging out to a battle every 55 days. And he overcame all of his enemies and united the Arabian Peninsula. And from there, that's where they built their empire that reigned supreme for 1,000 years. So that's what Abdu'l-Baha is talking about when he says that all their opponents were vanquished, dispersed, and destroyed, as it said it was going to happen. So, next verse. These men have power to shut up the sky so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. And they have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Abdu'l-Baha. This means that they would rule supreme in their age. As I told you, the Islamic empires reigned for 1,000 years. In other words, the law and teachings of Muhammad and the exposition and commentaries of Ali are a heavenly grace. Should they wish to bestow this grace, it is in their power to do so. And should they wish otherwise, no rain will fall. And by this rain is meant here the outpouring of grace. It goes on to say later, this means that the prophethood of Muhammad was similar to that of Moses and the power of Ali like that of Joshua. That is, it was in their power, had they so desired, to turn the water of the Nile into blood for the Egyptians and the deniers. Or in other words, to turn in consequence of their ignorance and pride, that which was the source of their life into the cause of their death. Thus, the sovereignty, wealth, and power of Pharaoh and of his people, which were the source of the nation's life, became, as a result of their opposition, denial, and pride, the very cause of their death, ruin, destruction, degradation, and wretchedness. Hence, these two witnesses had the power to destroy nations. Because if you remember back, I went to this part one a little bit with Moses. Moses went into Pharaoh's palace and said, "Let my people go." Pharaoh said, "No, I'm not going to let your people go." But through like the 10 plagues of Egypt and the power of God, he brought Moses brought Egypt to its knees, and that's when the children of Israel were freed from Egypt. You have something similar going on here with Muhammad, because as I said, the Arabian tribes were all a bunch of warring tribes with each other. Muhammad united them, and then they sent their Islamic armies out. And the Islamic armies brought many empires to their knees, much the same way that Moses brought Egypt to its knees. So this is a parallel that is being run here. And coming down to the last one. This means that they would also be endowed with outward power and ascendancy, that they might school the workers of iniquity and the embodiments of oppression and tyranny. For God had granted these two witnesses both outward might and inward power. And so it is that they reformed and educated the wicked, bloodthirsty, and iniquitous Arabs of the desert who were like ravening wolves and beasts. And as I said, the Arabs, they're just a bunch of tribes who all fought with each other. And when Islam first came, no one really took it seriously. But it was through a series of wars that they were able to unite the Arabian Peninsula together with the word of God. So we're going to the second paragraph. We'll do the same thing, and then we'll be taking a break. Now when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, men from every people, tribe, language, nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets tormented those who live on earth. But after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies looked on. So let's do a verse by verse breakdown. Revelation 11, verse 7. Now, when they have finished their testimony, and the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. Al-Duha. When they have accomplished that which they were bidden, these desert tribes might achieve substantive progress. As I said, the tribes were united under Muhammad and Islam, and then they built their empires that lasted for 1,000 years. And then Abdul-Baha continues. By this beast is meant the Umayyads. Remember, we went over him in part 1. That's the Islamic Caliphate, who assailed these witnesses from the pit of air. And indeed, it came to pass that the Umayyads assailed the religion of Muhammad and the truth of Ali, which consists in the love of God. Because remember, Abdul-Baha says that the Umayyad Caliphate from part 1 is the beast. The Umayyad Caliphate did not act in accordance with the teachings of Islam. That's what Abdul-Baha is saying right here. Remember, the Umayyad under Muawiyah had Imam Ali assassinated. And what they did is they took power and acted in exact opposite of what the teachings of Islam were. And he gets into this a little bit more. Abdul-Baha says, this is intended to a spiritual war, meaning that the beast would act in a complete opposition to the teachings, conduct, and character of these two witnesses, to such an extent that the virtues and perfections that have been diffused among the people and nations by virtue of their power would entirely vanish. The animal qualities and carnal desires would predominate. Because again, for Muawiyah to get power, he had to have Caliph Uthman assassinated, Imam Ali assassinated, and then Imam Hassan assassinated. And even many Islamic scholars widely condemn him now today, and Islam had to fall into the civil war. That's why Abdul-Baha says this here. That's the Umayyads, who are the beast, who are assailing Islam, because they are not acting in line with the teachings. It says, and their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is figuratively called Sodom in Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. He says, by their bodies is meant the religion of God, and by the street, exposure to public view. Sodom in Egypt, where my Lord was crucified, refers to the land in Syria, and especially to Jerusalem. For the Umayyads had their seat of power in this land, and it was here that the religion of God and the divine teachings first disappeared, leaving behind a soulless body. Their bodies refer to the religion of God, which remained as a dead and soulless body. Because you go back, remember back to part 1, Islam fell into a civil war. Muawiyah, he was with governor of Egypt and Damascus. And Egypt and Damascus sided with Muawiyah during the civil war. And so figuratively Sodom in Egypt is referring to the Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus, because Damascus was the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate. So that's why we had this, that's why it's figuratively Sodom in Egypt, because that was the seat of the Umayyad Caliphate, who assailed the religion of God and who was the beast of Daniel in Revelation. And after the Umayyad Caliphate came, as Abdul-Baha says, the religion of Islam turned into a dead and soulless body. And Abdul-Baha is going to get into this a little bit more. Next slide. For 3.5 days, men from every tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. Abdul-Baha. The 3.5 days is 3.5 years. 3.5 years is 1,260. Again, we see that coming up, the 1,260 after Hijrah, which takes us to year 1844, which brings us to the Bab. They would keep the religion of God before their eyes, but would not act in accordance with it. Yet they would not suffer to rest in the grave. That is, they would hold fast to its outward form and not entirely vanish from their midst, nor allow the body to be wholly destroyed and annihilated. Rather, they would forsake its reality while outwardly preserving its name and remembrance. It goes on to say, thus some manner of prayer and fasting was practiced among them, but the very foundations of the religion of God, which are goodly character, upright conduct, and the knowledge of the divine mysteries, had disappeared. I mean, because let's take my Islamic Sharia law nowadays. How much love do you see in Islamic Sharia law? There's not much. It's just about, really, it's all about like the control and the power and submission. The goodly character, upright conduct, and the knowledge has really disappeared. And a lot of that disappeared under the Umayyad Caliphate. And this is why Al-Baha'i says that was the Umayyads who assailed the religion of Islam. It goes on to say, to such an extent were the traces of human virtues, which are the bestowals of God and which constitute the spirit of this religion, erased that truthfulness, justice, love, concord, purity, sanctity, detachment, and all the heavenly attributes vanished from their midst. And what remained of the religion was mere prayer and fasting. This religion lasted for this condition lasted for 1,260 years. It was as though these two persons had died and their bodies were left soulless. So again, under the Umayyad Caliphate, truthfulness, justice, love, concord, purity, that all disappeared under them. And this lasted for a long time in Islam. It says, the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts because these two prophets tormented those who live on earth. Al-Baha'i says, by inhabitants of the earth is meant other peoples and nations such as those of Europe and the distant Asian lands, who seeing that the character of Islam had changed entirely, that the religion of God had been forsaken, that virtue, decency, and honor had vanished, and that these characters had been subverted, rejoiced that the morals of Muslims had been corrupted, and that they stood, therefore, to be vanquished by other nations. It says, sending each other gifts means that they would help each other, for these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on earth. That is, they subdued and subjugated the other peoples and nations of the earth. Because if you remember, going back to my presentation last week, let's take Spain, for example. Christian Spain and Muslim Spain fought each other for 800 years. All the various countries that were in Spain, they all had to unite to fight Islam for 800 years, and that's what eventually drove the Islamic armies out. That's what they're talking about when they begin sending each other gifts. It was these other countries like Spain, France, Poland, Austria, they all began uniting against the Islamic empires, because if they didn't start uniting, Islam was going to conquer Europe. That's what he's referring to by sending each other's gifts. So, but after 3.5 days, a breath of life entered from God entered, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them. Al-Duha, 3.5 days refers to 1,260 years. These two persons whose bodies are lying soulless, that is, the teachings and the religion that Muhammad had established and that Ali had promoted, whose reality had vanished and of which only empty form had remained, were again endowed with the spirit. After 1,260 years, were renewed by the Bab and by the allegiance of Qudus. Now, this is where we start to move over to, we're getting close to part 3 here. The Bab is the return of Elijah. And then Qudus. Now, the Bab, he had 18 letters of the living. Because Jesus, he had 12 disciples. And so the letters of the living in the Babis, they were equivalent to the disciples under Jesus. And there was 18 of them. Qudus was the last of the letter of the living. He was number 18. And so when they're referring to that, we're going to begin that next month. That's going to be part 3 of this presentation, getting to the Bab, but that's what that's referring to right there. Revelation 11. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies looked on. Abdu'l-Baha. Meaning that from the invisible heaven, they heard the voice of God saying, you have accomplished all that was called for with regarding to educating the people and conveying the glad tidings of that which is to come. You have delivered my message to the people, raised the call of truth, and fulfilled your every obligation. Now, even as Christ, you must lay down your life in the path of the beloved and suffer a martyr's death. Because remember, Christ, he was crucified on the cross. Muhammad, he was poisoned. Ali was assassinated. So that's what it's referring to here. Just like Christ suffers a martyr's death, so must you suffer a martyr's death also. And he goes on to say, that is, many of their enemies realized after their martyrdom the sublimity of their station and the excellence of their virtues, and testified to their greatness and perfections. Because during the time of Islam, people are not going to realize what the role that Islam is going to play. Because what they're going to see is they're going to see a lot of the warfare that's going on, and they're going to see that, hey, the character of Islam has been changed. And so as it says, they're going to send each other gifts and unite. But it's going to be after the Bab comes and Baha'i faith comes, that's when people are going to begin to realize what role they played and exactly what happened under the Umayyad Caliphate. By the time, many people are not going to realize it. And so this is where we begin to see a convergence here. Because 1260 after Hijrah is 1844. 457 BC plus the 2,300 years is 1844. This is and it says in Daniel 8 verse 14. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. And so under the Islamic calendar, that's 1844. The 2,300 years is 1844. The Edict of Toleration, that went out in 1844, allowing the Jews to return to Israel. But I'm going to get into this next part. The Jews also thought that the Messiah was coming in year 1840 and 1848, but that's going to be part 3 where I will address that. And by this point, the gospel has been preached to the entire world. Matthew 24 says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come from out, you will know that summer is near. No one knows the day, no one knows the hour, but you will know the season. 1844 tells us the season that we need to begin looking for Christ. And so that's where we're going to drop off today. Not drop off today, but we're going to end part 2. Time is 3 o'clock. Let's come back at 3:10, and then we will go into the Bab and the Babi history, and then we'll call it a day.
Steven, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Thank you for doing this. It's very great. I just wanted to know what sources were you using for these informations?
I received my master's degree in Middle East Studies, emphasis on Iran, and I did 3 deployments with the Army to the Middle East. So regarding the Islamic part, I'm just going to say too many for me to name individually. But I would say it is mostly getting from my master's degree going to Indiana University for the Islamic part. I'd say that's there. But as far as like the previous presentations, there's 4 books I've read on the Roman Empire from last week. One of them was Emperor Constantine, where it kind of goes into exactly how Emperor Constantine brought Christianity to the Roman Empire. Then another one's like Cleopatra. It's kind of going into what was going on during the time of King Herod. And then another one's Augustus, the first emperor. It kind of also goes into what was going on during the time of King Herod. So I would say those are my main ones, but I didn't bring my books this week. I will definitely bring them next week though.
And you're doing excellent with all the Arabic and Persian names.
Thank you. I don't know much Arabic, but my Persian is mediocre right now. So thank you very much.
Do we know who poisoned Prophet Muhammad?
I want to say it was after him because he fought one of the Jewish tribes. I want to say he's one of the Jewish women from the tribe that he fought, but I do not quote me on that. I have to go look that one up again.
And Ali was killed in
Ali was assassinated because Muawiyah, he wanted to be the sole ruler of Islam. He's the Umayyad Caliphate. After they had their civil war, Islam was split between the Umayyads and Imam Ali. Once Imam Ali was assassinated, that's when the Umayyads took sole control of Islam.
Is it true that all of them were somehow poisoned or assassinated? Every single one.
Historically, I cannot historically say that they were because it's disputed, but it was very coincidentally done to leave Muawiyah, who Abdul Baha says is the beast, sole ruler of Islam, and he defiled Islam per Abdul Baha. So historically, the documents don't exist, but I would say it would be very convenient if he didn't.
I saw that in Nabil's narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The Guardian gives a description, and I think each one of them were somehow.
Yeah.
None of them had a normal death.
They didn't. Yeah, no, because Uthman was assassinated by those assassins from Egypt, and Egypt supported Muawiyah's claim.
Not the Caliphates, but the Imams.
Yeah, then Imam Ali was assassinated. Hassan, he mysteriously passed away. Then Imam Hussein, the third one, he died at the Battle of Karbala. So it was all very mysterious how it happened.
I have, if I might add, I have read that aside from the Imam Ali, the next four were killed during the caliphate of the Umayyad Caliphate.
Correct.
And Abdul Baha points out that the verse in Revelation that talks about the dragon, how there were 12 stars and the dragon swept down a third of the stars, that would be 4.
Yep.
That refers to the death of those imams, the 2nd through 5th imams at the hands of the Umayyads.
I go over that next part under the Bab. So we'll be walking right through there.
Okay.
Yes, Stephen, number 2, Imam Hassan, he was poisoned.
Mhm.
So we know that, yeah. And
Okay.
by the way, they're still waiting for number 12, right?
Well, that's the Bab. Yeah, you can pause the recording. That's fine. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending part 3 of my presentation. Part 3, we're going over the Bab and the 6th trumpet blast and the 2nd woe of the book of Revelation. So we're going to break this into 3 distinct parts. We're going to be going over the 1844 Convergence, and then we're going to be going over the Bab and how he's talked about in biblical prophecy. Then we're going to be going over Revelation chapter 12. And Abdul Baha gives us a verse-by-verse breakdown of Revelation 12. So we'll do the same thing as we did in the last part. And so the Jews during this time, they thought that the Messiah was going to be coming. This is a slightly different from the 1844 Convergence. Because you're 1840 in the Jewish calendar, that's 1840 AD, that's year 5,600 in the Jewish calendar. So what the thought was is they pulled this verse, Genesis 15. Then the Lord said to him, referring to Abraham, know that for certain your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. That's what they thought was, okay, year 5,600 of the Jewish calendar, we're going to be mistreated for 400 years, and then the Messiah comes. So they thought that the Messiah was going to be coming in year 1840, and this brings us up to the 1844 Convergence. And so many Jews thought this during the time that, like in the city of Warsaw in Poland, many Jews must set up watches because it's their job to announce the coming of the Messiah. However, it got to 1841 and it didn't happen. But then there's another one out there where Jews said that the Messiah would come in year 1848. July 1848 was the trial of the Bab. And here's what one Jewish rabbi said. In any event, in the opinion of the Sefer HaZohar on the Khan Zippor, it is clear the true end time is deferred until after 608 years of the 6th millennium. That's year 1848. So the Jews were looking for the Messiah during this time. So you have the Christians coming up with the year 2300, those 2300 years. Islam is coming up with the 1260 after Hijrah, and the Jews are also looking for their Messiah to come. And then to recap from part 2, this is the 1848 Convergence, because we had the 1260 after Hijrah. That's year 1844. 457 BC plus 2,300 years is 1844. The Edict of Toleration. This is the edict that began allowing more freedom of religion in the Ottoman Empire, and many Jews began returning to Israel during this time. That was 1844, plus the Jews were also looking for their Messiah during this time. And by this point, the gospel has been preached to the entire world. And as I said from last one, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as the twigs get tender and the leaves come out, you will know that summer is near. Start looking. This told us the season. And so many Christians knew that 2,300 years was coming up. They were ecstatic. Christ is about to return. He's going to come in riding on a white horse from the clouds with an army of angels. The whole world's going to see it. And then we're going to be a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. And like the Star of the West magazine said, in America, Europe, and Asia, the clear message of the ending of the prophetic time in 1844 was proclaimed with power by many voices. Another one, witnesses were raised up in Europe, in Holland, Germany, Russia, and the Scandinavian countries. Joseph Wolff, the missionary to the Levant, preached in Greece, Palestine, Turkey, Afghanistan, and other regions the coming of the judgment hour. So Christians are ecstatic. Christ is about to return. We are about to see this messianic times, the end times. They're excited. what ended up happening? The Great Disappointment. No group was more disappointed than the Millerites, because the minister, William Miller, he began preaching that Christ is going to come back in 1844. He began preaching that 13 years earlier in 1831. Because the Bible says there's going to be a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. There's going to be no water. We don't need the sun, because Christ is he's going to be the sun that's going to light the whole earth. So they were so sure of this, they sold all their possessions. Because after 1844, we don't need it. Why would we need his possessions? Everything's going to be different. They thought that Christ is going to return from the sky. Got to 1845. Well, I guess that was wrong. It didn't happen that way. And so and it wasn't just the Millerites who thought this. A lot of Christians thought this. And so a lot of the Christians, they had to go through and explain why they were wrong. Well, what the Millerites said was, well, those who actually stayed in the faith, because they lost like 90% of the followers after that. But the ones who stayed in said, well, that wasn't the return of Christ. It was just the beginning of the reconsecration of the sanctuary. And so Christ is going to return soon. And they formed the Seventh-day Adventists. So if you ever see a Christian who's a Seventh-day Adventist, this is how they got going. They got going in the Great Disappointment. And then what other Christians did is they took those verses, the 2,300 days. What they did is they got an eraser out and they changed the translation to 2,300 mornings and evenings. So they're saying, well, this wasn't actually 2,300 years. It was 2,300 mornings and evenings, which is sacrificial days, which is different. So that's what that verse is talking about. Well, okay, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? It's the same thing. It's 2,300 years. So, but what they did wrong was biblical prophecy is not written literally. It is written symbolically. They took those prophecies literally and they applied it to 1844. But no, biblical prophecy, again, is symbolic. And remember, no one knows the day, no one knows the hour. So they couldn't even say it's 1844. But regarding the return of Christ, well, what does he say? Matthew 24, Christ says, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So the angels in heaven don't know when it's going to be. Jesus doesn't know when it's going to be. Only God knew when it was going to be. 1 Thessalonians said, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Again, he's not going to be coming with an army of angels in the heavens riding on a white horse. That is symbolic language. He's going to quietly come and quietly go. And then Revelation 16, it says, behold, I'm coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may go about naked and be seen exposed. Again, he's coming in quietly and he's leaving quietly. You're going to have to watch out for it, otherwise you're going to miss it. That's what he said. But before Christ can return, Elijah must pave the way for his coming. Because if you remember back to part 1, John the Baptist was the spiritual return of Elijah. John the Baptist was not physically Elijah. Because if you physically claim to be Elijah, that is reincarnation, which is not possible. So we have to look for the spiritual return of Elijah, not the physical return of Elijah. In Malachi 4, it says, see, I will send you the prophet Elijah to come before you, that great and dreadful day the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So again, Elijah must pave the way for Christ to come. Matthew 17, it says, the disciples asked him, why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. Because the disciples are asking Jesus right there, where's Elijah at? Because the Bible says he went up to heaven in a fiery chariot. Shouldn't he come back down in a fiery chariot? Jesus says, no, that's not how that's going to be. John the Baptist is a spiritual return of Elijah. So we have to apply the same standard. We're not looking for the physical return of Elijah. We are looking for the spiritual return of Elijah. So here's where we start looking. It says, Christ says, for as lightning that comes from the east is visible in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. When Jesus said that, he was standing on the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is east of Jerusalem. So we got Jerusalem, east of Jerusalem is Mount of Olives. We have to start looking east of the Mount of Olives. start looking back towards towards Persia. Isaiah 41, it says, "Who has stirred you, one from the east, calling him to righteousness, to his service? He hands nations over to him and subdues kings before him. He tears them to dust with his sword, to win blood and chaff with his bow." Again, talking about the east. We have to move east to Jerusalem. In the book of Enoch, it says, "And in those days, the angels will gather together and will throw themselves towards the east upon the Parthians and Medes." That's Persia in the 1800s and Iran modern day. "They will stir up the kings so that a disturbing spirit will come upon them, and they will drive them from their thrones, and they will come out like lions from their lairs and like hungry wolves from the middle of their flocks." So we have to start moving towards the east. And it says here in Jeremiah 49, verses 38 to 39, "I will set my throne in Elam and destroy her king and officials, declares the Lord. But in the latter days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord." Again, the latter days right here. That's we have to look to Elam. Elam is in Iran, modern day Iran. In the 1800s, that was Persia. So in 1844, we have to start looking to Persia if we want to find where Elijah is going to come. And the Bab received his vision in the year 1844. That was the convergence right there. And the Bab means the gate because he's preparing the gate for Christ to come. And if you remember from last week, the three woes are the coming of the three prophets of God. The first was Muhammad. Now we're getting to the second woe, which coincides with the sixth trumpet blast. This is the coming of the Bab. So now we're here. Now we're moving down Revelation. And so the Bab in 1844, he declared that he was the next manifestation. Well, a lot of people did not like that. So like the clergy and the government officials, he was upsetting the established powers, and they're saying, no, these prophecies have to take literally, not symbolically. How can you be the spiritual return of Elijah? So what they decided to do is, okay, 1848, he's been doing this for 4 years. What we're going to do, we're going to bring him to the city of Tabriz. We're going to bring him up on trial in front of everybody, and we are going to humiliate the Bab, show him for the fraud that he is. So it got to the day of the trial. Everyone in Tabriz is talking about the trial of the Bab. Thousands of people are coming in to watch the trial. And so when the Bab gets up there on stage, all the clergy and all the government officials are going to sit in their chairs, except one chair. That was the chair for the Prince of Persia, Prince Nasruddin. So the Bab does, he gets up there for the trial, he looks around, he walks up to the chair of Prince Nasruddin and sits in the throne for the heir of the Prince of Persia. Everyone's just shocked at this point. They're like, you just disrespected the Prince of Persia. Who do you think you are? The Bab made his declaration. I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have invoked for 1,000 years, and whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. Verily I say, it is incumbent upon the peoples of both East and West to obey my word and to pledge allegiance to my person. Here's a few things we need to show up. He did not physically claim to be Elijah. He's spiritual Elijah, the promised one. If he physically claimed to be Elijah, that is reincarnation, which is not possible. So just like John the Baptist was a spiritual return of Elijah, the Bab is a spiritual return of Elijah. We're invoking the same thing that we used for John the Baptist in Jesus. Then he says right here, verily I say it is incumbent upon peoples of both East and West to obey my word. What he's referring to here is Christianity and Judaism. So, excuse me, Christianity and Islam. Because the East is referring to Islam. Because remember, the fifth trumpet blast was the coming of Muhammad. And Ishmael, he was promised 12 rulers and a great nation. Those are the 12 Shi'ite Imams, and the Sunni Caliphate is the great nation. And then Isaac, the covenant was made through Isaac. And that's when the line Jesus came down and Christ died for our sins. And that was a fulfillment of their prophecy. This right here is where Islam and Christianity begin to converge with each other. He's claiming both. He's claiming to be the promised one from Islam, and he's also claiming to be the return of Elijah in Christianity. And it's his job to pave the way for Christ to come. And so let's go back to Jeremiah 49, because this is the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy. I will set my throne in Elam and destroy her king and officials, declares the Lord. But in the latter days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord. The Bab physically sat in the throne in the latter days. So that was the fulfillment of that prophecy right there. This happened in Elam, which was Persia in the 1800s, modern day Iran. The Shah of the Persia at the time, Muhammad Shah Qajar, he passed away a couple of days after the trial of the Bab. And he says that God will destroy her king and officials. Prime Minister Haji Mirza Akasi was exiled soon afterwards. And the governor where the Bab was put on trial, he passed away the day the Bab said he would. So right there with the Bab is the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy that the throne will be set in Elam in the latter days and the king and officials shall be destroyed. So that's what the Bab fulfilled right there. So what we're going to do, we're going to shift gears a little bit here. We are going to go through Revelation 12, verse by verse breakdown like we did last time, and then we'll call it a day. Revelation 12. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed in the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child in the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for by God, where she might be taken care of 1,260 days. So Abdu'l-Baha, remember he's the Paul equivalent, he gives us a verse by verse breakdown of this. So a great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Abdu'l-Baha tells us, this woman is that bride, the religion of God that descended upon Muhammad. The sun with which she was clothed, the moon which was under her feet, are the 2 governments which are under the shadow of that religion, the Persian and the Ottoman. For the emblem of Persia is the sun, and that Ottoman is the crescent moon. Thus, the sun and moon allude to the 2 governments under the shadow of the religion of God. And he says, these 12 stars represent the 12 imams, who are the promoters of the religion of Muhammad and the educator of the nation, and who's shown as stars in the heaven of guidance. So, there's a little visual representation. Because right here, this was the emblem of Persia during the time. You had the lion with the sword, and you had the sun in the background. That right there is the sun that the woman was clothed in. And then this right here was the emblem for the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire fell in 1918 at the end of World War I, so not even 100 years ago. Those are the 2 emblems. You had the sun and you had the moon there for the emblems for the Persian and the Ottoman empires, and they're the ones who controlled the Middle East and Islam at the time. And then for the 12 stars, those are the 12 imams. Because Persia, they were a Shiite country at the time, and that's where the Bab declared to be the return of Elijah. And so that's why the 12 imams are, that's why they're included in there. It says, she was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. It says, this religion will suffer great difficulties and endure great toil and trouble until a perfect offspring is produced therefrom. That is, until a subsequent and promised manifestation, who is a perfect offspring is reared in the bosom of this religion, which even as its mother. By this offspring is meant the Bab, the final point, who was in truth born from the religion of Muhammad. In other words, that sacred reality, which was the child and the result of this religion of God, its mother, which was the promised one, came into being in the heavenly kingdom of that religion, but was caught up unto God to allude to the ascendancy of the dragon. After 1,260 days, the dragon was destroyed and the offspring of the religion of God, the promised one, was made manifest. So this is talking about the Baha'i religion here, because as Abdu'l-Baha says, people aren't going to realize what the purpose of Islam is until afterwards. This is where the Bab came out of, so Islam served its purpose because the 1,260 days was 1844. But the Bab declared it 1844. So that's when the Islamic calendar ends, and then the Babis era begins. And the Babis, they were very heavily persecuted during their time, because it's estimated that about 20,000 Babis were killed during the persecution. And this is what the Bab is talking about. This is what Abdu'l-Baha is talking about right here, is that as they're about to give birth, she's going to cry out in pain, because that's talking about the persecution that the Babis are going to be forced to go through, because it's preparing the way for Christ to return. It says, then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. Al-Duha, this dragon represents the Umayyads. We've already gone over that. He goes on to say, who destroyed a third of the holy and sanctified souls who descended from the pure lineage of Muhammad, and who were even as stars. Because if you remember back to part 1, Muawiyah, when he took power for the Umayyad Caliphate, Caliph Uthman was assassinated, Imam Ali was assassinated, and Imam Hassan mysteriously passed away, most likely assassinated. But any direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad who began to become popular among the people, he had him killed off. That's why the tail was sweeping a third out of the stars out of the sky. Because if you remember back to last week during my presentation, going over the symbols, the sun, moon, and stars represent someone to God. That's why direct descendants of Muhammad are represented as stars here. So, as I said, this dragon represents the Umayyads, and they were the ones who defiled Islam, according to Abdul-Baha. Verse 3 continues to say, the dragon stood in front of the woman whom was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. He says, this woman is the religion of God, as explained before. The dragon standing near her signifies that it was keeping watch to devour her child as soon as it had been delivered. This child was a promised manifestation, who was the offspring of the religion of Muhammad. The Umayyads were ever anxious to lay hold on the promised one, who was to appear from the lineage of Muhammad, that they might destroy and annihilate him, for they greatly feared his advent. And so whenever they found a descendant of Muhammad who was respected in the eyes of the people, they killed him. Because as I said, the Muawiyah, how the Umayyad Caliphate acted was not in line with what was the teachings of Islam. And so they were afraid of this prophecy of the Bab coming. So anyone who became popular during that time was directed to Muhammad, they killed off because they were living in a state of fear of this prophecy. So that's what that's referring to there. It says, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. Al-Dubaha says, this glorious son is the promised manifestation, who was born of the religion of God and reared in the bosom of the divine teachings. The iron rod is a symbol of the might and power. It is not a sword, and means that he will shepherd all the nations of the earth by virtue of his divine might and power. And by this son is the Bab. Because the Bab, he did not rule through the military power. He did not rule with a sword. He ruled with the power of God in the ideas in his speech. That's how he ruled. That's why it's an iron scepter, not a sword. And this prophecy here is a prophecy concerning the Bab, that he is going to be the one who will come. So, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Abdullah says, this is a prophecy concerning the Bab, who ascended to the kingdom, the throne of God, and the seat of his sovereignty. Because remember, the Bab was executed in the year 1850. So that's why he's being snatched up to God and being sent to heaven. That's what this is a prophecy for. It says, the woman fled into the desert to take a place prepared for by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. It says, that is, the religion of God betook itself to the desert, meaning that the vast desert of Hijaz and the Arabian Peninsula. That is, the Arabian Peninsula became the home, the habitation of the focal center of the religion of God. After 1,260 years, that religion will cease to be in effect, for the fruit of that tree had been manifested, and its result had been produced. As I said, after the time of Muhammad, the Islamic Caliphates expanded, and they were the supreme powers for the next 1,000 years. That's why the religion of God became the focal point. And it was through Islam, in Elam, as the Bible said it was going to happen, that the Bab came from. And that is why, that was the point of Islam, to prepare, to bring the Bab, to begin preparing the way for the coming of Christ. Then the 6th trumpet blast. At that very hour, there was a severe earthquake, and a tenth of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Abdul Baha says, this earthquake occurred in Shiraz after the martyrdom of the Bab. The city plunged into turmoil and many people were killed. The great agitation ensued, moreover, from diseases, cholera, scarcity, famine, starvation, and other afflictions. An agitation the like of which had never been witnessed. So this earthquake that comes at the end of the sixth trumpet blast was a little earthquake that decimated the city of Shiraz, and that's where the Bab came from. So that right there was a fulfillment of the prophecy. It says, the second woe is past, the third woe is coming soon. Now, here's the thing though. Between this first woe and the second woe, there was 1,260 years. But this one here says the third cause may be graciously rewarded by thee. So between the second woe and the third woe, there's going to be 19 years versus 1,260 years before. And so 1844, which is when the Bab declared, in 1863 plus 19 is 1863. And that's when Baha'u'llah declared to be the return of Christ, exactly as the Bab said it was going to happen. And then here's just a few quotes from the Bab that I want to go over. First one, for all that hath been exalted in the Bayan is basically the it's still basically the Babi version of the Bible, because like the Christians had the Bible, Muslims had the Quran, the Babis had the Bayan. It says, is but a ring upon my hand, and I myself, verily, but a ring upon the hand of him whom God shall make manifest. That's referring to the return of Christ. Glorified be his mention. He turneth it as he pleaseth. For whatsoever he pleaseth, and through whatsoever he pleaseth, he verily is a help in peril among the Most High. Because the Bab says here, I'm preparing the way for Christ. I am not actually Christ. Christ is coming soon. That's what he's saying here, because in the Bible, Elijah must proclaim the return to Christ. If that does not happen, Christ cannot return. The Bab also said, I swear by the most holy essence of God, exalted and glorified be he, that in the day of the appearance of him whom God shall make manifest, 1,000 perusals of the Bayan cannot equal the perusal of a single verse to be revealed by him whom God shall make manifest. Next one. It behooveth you to await the day of the appearance of him whom God shall manifest. Indeed, my aim in planting the tree of the Bayan has been none other than to enable you to recognize me. In truth, I myself am the first to bow before God and to believe in him. My last one. When the day star of Baha will shine resplendent above the horizon of eternity, it is incumbent upon you to present yourself before his throne. Beware lest ye be seated in his presence or ask questions without his leave. Fear ye God, O concourse of the mirrors. Because the Bab is saying here, I am preparing the way for Christ, as this was my job to do. And that's exactly what he did. And so with that, we're going to have a closing video, and then I'll have I'll have a slide that just gives a summary of the last 2 weeks. Then we'll jump to question and answer. So, and the song is The Days of Elijah, and it's a worship song from the Christians. All right, here's a summary slide for the last 2 weeks, everything we've gone over. Next week, remember back from part 1 today, there were 4 kingdoms. Next week, we're going over the other 3 kingdoms. In Baha'u'llah, he wrote letters to world leaders. And we're going to be breaking down those letters to world leaders next week, going over the next 3 kingdoms. With that, we'll jump to question and answer. Questions, comments?
Oh,
I think Hillary has it.
Okay. Yeah, just unmute
You
yourself.
wanna,
okay, I would, are you gonna go over how the Bob was related to Muhammad, actually?
I was not going to go over it, no, because the Bible really doesn't get into that. So
Oh,
I'm trying to stick it more for a way that the Christians are going to understand. So I'm really not going to get into that at all.
because it seemed to fit in with the quotes you had today.
It did fit in, but as I said, it's just, I'm already dumping enough information on everybody.
Okay,
Sharon is saying very good job. He wants you to know that
Thank you very much.
he really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for a
Thank you very
wonderful
much.
presentation. Looking forward to next week.
Do you want to explain the next dates?
The next presentation is going to be next Saturday, same time. And then we got a couple events going on between the weeks after that. So it's next Saturday, then we take a 2-week break. Then I do point number 5, presentation. Yes, on November 20th.
Thank you very much, Stephen. This was really wonderful. We really appreciate it. A lot of research, a lot of time, and we also appreciate everyone joining us. And once we do some of these series, they'll eventually go on YouTube, and they'll be under the Normal Baha'i Center YouTube channel. So thank you very much for coming. And if there are no other questions, we're gonna end and we're gonna say goodbye. Take care, everyone.